Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome back to the channel. Wanted to put together a video today. It's going to be probably a little bit shorter than some of my other ones have been, but I was trying to put some pieces of the puzzle together here with some things that I've been working on recently. I've had a lot of different irons in the fire. Definitely been busy prepping for the return of school, getting that up and going. For those who have maybe followed along a little bit with my work and what I've been doing. Of course, being a public school teacher for quite some time, and then leaving the public school and now working with a co-school, which a couple of people have asked, Justin, what's a co-school? A co-school is essentially like a co-op, a homeschool co-op. So the school that I work at is composed entirely of homeschool families. The co-school model, it's a classical model, which means it relies a lot on the classical model of education. It's composed of a lower grammar and upper grammar for what would in the traditional model be K through 5, what we call dialectic section in what would be the equivalent of middle school, and then our high school is referred to as rhetoric. So that's kind of the model, and you can dig more into classical education. There's all kinds of resources out there, and we just happen to be also a classical Christian school as well. So at any rate, I'm preparing for that. I'm getting ready to start back up there. And then I'm also teaching a one-off economics course at another homeschool co-op as well. So I've just been busy kind of planning and prepping. About half of my classes changed this year as far as the content that I'm teaching. So I've had to do a lot of prep to get ready for those. Changing the periods of time that I'm teaching is unique, to have to go through and review and make sure that you have all the information and resources together. And so I've spent a lot of time related with that. I've been doing some reading, just research, continuing to do advocacy. I will probably, hopefully in the latter part of 2021, put the bow on my second book, although I've got a couple of other, writing projects that are up in the air as well. So just a lot going on. And again, trying to connect dots and pieces together with some things as I've been interacting with all of those different things. So I had a kind of a moment last night where I thought, based on everything that's been going on, related to specifically critical race theory, this beginning of the school year coming about, some of the research that I've been doing and preparing for classes, that I had this moment where I kind of connected some dots together that I wanted to present some ideas for you parents, again, who are, hopefully keeping a watchful eye as this school year begins. I know there's a lot going on in terms of that, social emotional learning. And now all of a sudden here we get sprung on us, again, more debate related to COVID and mask policies and things of that nature. And also too, just as a quick side note with this as well, I wanted to promote an event that I'm going to be a part of. You can find this, and you will be able to find it online through a couple of different groups, Facebook groups for parent involvement in education. We are going to be, I will be a part of an event to prepare parents for the coming school year. It's going to be on August 21st. And let me see if I can find real quickly here the dates or the location for you. I know we just settled on this last night. We were able to secure a location. But if you search through Facebook for the groups Purple for Parents, No Left Turn, Brownsburg education, I think it's agenda-free education. There's a couple of different groups on Facebook that are going to be kind of tied into this. I was looking to see if I could find this real quick. I'll post it in the link to this video in the description, so you'll be able to find that there. But it's going to be at a hotel conference room down by the airport, which is on the southwest side of Indianapolis. So if you're in Hendricks County area, Monroe, Morgan County, even Putnam County, Marion County, any surrounding areas, I think would be kind of targets for attending. I think it's going to be a cap of about 45 to 50 people. I think that's what the conference room holds. But there will be 3 guest speakers that day, myself included. Alvin Liu, who has done some great work with Unify Carmel. He's been involved with some things up in Hamilton County. He will be presenting as well. He'll be talking about how to prepare yourself as a parent for meeting with administrators. He has a really great message. He and I have talked on numerous occasions. So he's going to talk a little bit about ways in which you as a parent can prepare yourself, both doing your homework, prior to, and then what the expectations should be during a meeting with administrators. He's had a lot of great experience with that. So he'll be presenting on that. I will be presenting specifically on how to identify social emotional learning and critical race theory embedded into curriculum. So as a parent, there's a lot of questions about is this stuff being taught? How's it being taught? I'm going to give you some perspective in what to look for, key phrases, words, sources of curriculum, that kind of thing. And then a colleague of mine, somebody who's been very influential in my career, he's helped out tremendously with my book writing. We do a podcast together. He is currently still a public education teacher, Mr. Mike Margison. He will be presenting as well, and he will be talking about why schools are not living up to their, not even expectation, but to what they were created for, which is to educate our children. So he will be talking about a little bit more of the current environment of schools, some historical aspects to consider as well. And so it should be a great event. We're really looking forward to it. We hope you can attend. Again, I will certainly post links to the information of the event where you can RSVP. As I said, there will be limited space. I don't know what the turnout will look like. I know that we already had, I believe the last time I checked, close to 10 people who had RSVP'd. So about a quarter of the way there to getting that filled up. So if you are interested in attending, that'll be August 21st at a hotel conference room. I believe it's a Hampton Inn. I could be wrong about that. I'll have all that information for you there. So along kind of with what I am preparing for that day, the preparation that I've been doing for some classes that I'm going to be teaching, I'm going to be teaching in particular this year, an ancient civilizations, Western civilization course, which of course those who are advocates for critical race theory hate. They hate it when, you take a Western approach to everything historical, but it is the genesis of our history here in the United States. We have direct ties to Western civilization, although I do know that there are other civilizations that have impacted and affected us in our development and growth as a civilization ourselves here. But I was kind of going through and along with the most recent podcast episode that I did, I co-host a podcast again with Mike Margison called They Never Taught Me That. And in that podcast, what we do is we take content that gets taught in schools and we try to fill in the gaps. We bring liberty-minded approaches that don't get taught because they don't fit the narrative of what, the standard curriculum producers like Pearson, McGraw-Hill, Glencoe, those textbook publishers, they don't usually present these ideas because for the most part, they're counter to the narrative that they want to produce, which is government, that you basically bow down to government and see the government as, great. And even the times when you look at textbooks where they cover government foul ups, it's excused or explained away or whatever. So we try to just, present that information that doesn't typically get introduced in the classroom. And so in the last episode that we did, we talked about slavery, and we are going to be taking on the 1619 project this week. So we'll be recording probably on Sunday afternoon about that. And again, the textbooks kind of take some of the similar approaches in that they don't do a very good job of explaining, the historical narrative of slavery. They pretty much talk about how, European powers coming into the 15th century, 16th century, the age of exploration in the shadow of the scientific revolution, the need for growing economies in Europe pushed a lot of those countries to have to explore to find new resources, gold, and everything like that. And so they'll talk about, the exploration. Europeans came, conquered, destroyed native populations, all very historically accurate, should be addressed. But then when it comes to the issue of slavery, then it's like, where do they pick that up at, right? They talk, and typically what they do is they talk about the Portuguese sailing along the coast of Africa, establishing contact with those West African kingdoms, and that, they were introduced to the slave trade there. And then they use that to then start the transatlantic slave trade, right? And that's the typical kind of narrative that gets followed in most standard curriculum. Well, the problem with that is that it completely dismisses the role that slavery had played in societies, both leading up to and prior to, right, that age of exploration. And that was kind of a connect the dot moment for me, where while we were prepping for that episode, I thought Mike brought up a really great point. If you had a chance to listen to that show, if not, I will also try to include the link in the description here for you, so that if you are interested, you go back and listen to it. But he said something that really resonated with me. And what he said was, something to the effect of, when you look at the totality of history and you look at the populations of civilizations, and you take into account that there have been thousands and thousands of years now of civilizations, right? When you think about, and we have a tendency to do this, I think, and this is where I want to try to lead into, hopefully giving you some insight as you think about this, and I'll connect this dot here in a second as well, that a majority of the human race, okay, that has lived on this planet has lived in abject poverty, and again, I don't have numbers to back this up to support this, but a significant chunk of that group of people, right, the totality of human history, not only has lived in abject poverty, but many of them have been in a position of being serfs or slaves. Now, I know there is a huge difference between the two, so let me clarify. Living in, as a serf would probably be maybe like one step above being a slave, in that, I guess you could say, for many serfs, especially the way that serfdom was practiced in Europe. I can't speak so much to maybe how it was practiced in Asia. I know that they did adopt serfdom over there as well. Maybe it was practiced different. I haven't researched it enough to know. But the way that serfdom had been practiced in Europe, technically you did have the ability maybe to work off or leave in your position, although there wasn't much of an opportunity to advance in society. Not until the Industrial Revolution came along did we see kind of that gradual breakdown of serfdom model. But in particular, slavery as it existed even in biblical times, right? I mean, obviously we know slavery existed going all the way back into biblical times, but as it progressed into more what we would maybe call modern civilizations, right? Specifically in Persia, as it related to the rise of Persia. And then certainly once you get into Greece and then into Rome, the Romans in particular were pretty brutal to their slaves and relied more on slave labor to build their empire, republic, and then ultimately empire. And there are many historians who have documented, the ways in which the Romans would conquer other peoples and then enslave them, bring them back to Rome, and use them on farms in agriculture. The state would own them and use them to build and construction projects. Mike talked about this in particular. And again, when you look at other civilizations too, Asian cultures, Southeast Asia, Africa, he talked specifically in the show that we did on Mansa Musa, and him being, particularly claimed as one of the richest men to ever live, and some of the journeys that he made, and people just commented on, all the wealth that he gave away, all of the buildings that were built in his name, But the books will claim he built them, right? But it wasn't him; it was his slaves that did it. So again, slavery existing in Africa, even in East African kingdoms of Axum and Kush. So at any rate, the Songhai, Mali empires in the West certainly practiced slavery. And again, that was evident when we see that picked up with European contact on the west coast of Africa as it led into the age of exploration. So let's pause here for a second. You might be saying, okay, great, Justin, you've just talked about slavery and this impact that it had and kind of tracing it back. So how does that relate to, what your focus is here or what you're trying to claim about connecting dots and things of that nature? Well, I think that's a first thing to recognize, right? Is that, you have to understand the totality of the slave trade and that it didn't just originate out of thin air as maybe, well, I won't even say they claim that it was originated out of thin air. The claim that they make is that the creation of the United States is just foundationally tied to slavery, and that there wasn't any other underlying motives to the creation of this country, which again, if you study Western history and the way that it is historically presented, it was that there was persecution in Europe, Protestant versus Catholic, in many, many parts of Europe, the Huguenots in France, and obviously what was going on in England, and that carried over into Germany in parts, well, what will become Germany. And so people were fleeing that to seek an opportunity for freedom. And along with that, then, came the fruits of what was developed in Europe, which would include slavery. And I documented in that episode that we did that there were free, mostly mixed race, but some African peoples that were living in the New World prior to the middle 1600s, where slavery really started to change in terms of how it was practiced, to where we hear it the way that it's presented more in our standard textbooks, where the tobacco and ultimately sugar and then cotton industries would really radicalize the way that slavery was conducted, especially here in North America. But as Mike pointed out, you look at Central America, the Caribbean, South America, particularly the Portuguese and Brazil, did a lot, related to that. So there's all that aspect to it. Why do I bring that up? Well, because of course, when you think about the role of slavery, you compare that to the ideas of the Enlightenment, which were so core to the development of our government here in the United States, right? The founding fathers writing documents, obviously like the Declaration of Independence, the rights of man, common sense, different charters of liberty and freedom, and, how we should be able to cut ties from our colonizers, and whatnot. And you say, well, gosh, that certainly did not live up for those who were minorities, right? That it was basically a system that benefited, free white men, landowning men. Not every white man benefited from that. Landowning white males who had privilege and could vote and basically ran, everything. And the reason that I'm tracing that is because one of the core tenets in CRT is that racism is systemic, right? That it is grossly embedded into society. And make the claim, as this comes from the American Bar Association, acknowledgement that racism is a normal feature of society as embedded within systems and institutions like the legal system that replicate racial inequality. This dismisses the idea that racist incidents are aberrations, but instead are manifestations of structural and systemic racism. They go on to talk about how CRT promotes the rejection of popular understanding about racism, that arguments are made that racism is just a few bad apples or actors, but really CRT recognizes that racism is codified in law, embedded in structures, and woven into public policy. So what I wanted to kind of maybe draw your attention to or get you to think about as you maybe try to first, obviously, look to identify CRT ideology embedded into the curriculum. And again, just as a quick side note, people talk about CRT isn't being taught. Of course, no one is arguing that they are at the high school level creating classes on CRT. What I think people are instead saying is these kinds of attitudes are being embedded into historical teachings, right? So when they say we need to teach the real history, we can say we do teach the real history. We're just not going to the point that you want us to go to, where we would say, for example, that there were very negative things that happened to minorities, obviously in particular African Americans and Blacks in the United States. We acknowledge that, we talk about it, we discuss it, we break it down into how it's affected society, then how it affects society now, on and on. That's perfectly normal to do, right? And I would advocate for that any day of the week. I try to uphold that when I teach U.S. history, and I teach from colonial, pre-colonial America up to Reconstruction in the section that I teach. I go through some very difficult conversations and discussions with my students on that. And so, again, I think that's perfectly normal. But what's not normal is, shame walks or privilege exercises where you make people identify, their privilege over others and whatnot. That's lunacy, in my opinion. That serves no purpose. And along with that, we are seeing some who are in the pro-CRT camp advocating for other forms of embarrassment and shaming for certain groups, obviously in particular, mostly white people, but there are even subgroups within society that they are attempting to try to shame, law enforcement being one, and whatnot. And so, again, what I wanted to try to do was, once you can identify that stuff being embedded, how do you respond to that, right? If you're going to have conversations with people, first thing I would say is try not to do it on social media, although that's, pretty much the mode and whatnot that we use today. But if you're having conversations in, coffee shops or, wherever, just socially, that you should present this kind of position to them. And that is that first and foremost, while this system in the United States is not perfect, and no one ever claimed it was, and again, I've even said in previous work that I've done that you read the language of the founders, and they very much are clear that this is not a perfect system. I also talked about in the last episode that I did in my podcast, the fact that you cannot apply a historical worldview of today to the early, mid, and late 1700s. That's just not fair to do. There's no way that you can say the world in which we live in today, which is post-slavery, should have been viewed the way that it was back in just say 1776, whatever. Okay, prior to that, after that, whatever. There's just no way you can do that and be intellectually honest with yourself. That is what leads to revisionist history. That's what leads to things like the 1619 Project. Okay. So that's first and foremost what I'd say is make sure that you understand that no one was claiming that this system was perfect. There were many founding fathers who saw the evils of slavery. There were even some who were actively, trying to break that institution apart. Questions of how quickly that could be done or how quickly it should have been done. And again, of course, a lot of people today playing armchair quarterback will say, well, they should have done it quicker. They knew it was evil, yet they continued to prop it up, so on and so forth. I don't feel comfortable with saying that should have been the case. It's easy for me to sit here in 2021 and say that, but back then, I don't think that would have been something that we could have expected of them to be able to do that. Again, we can call them out. We can say, here was Jefferson writing about all men are created equal while being a slave owner. Let's talk about that, right? What does that mean? How does that affect us? How did it affect them? So on and so forth. But then to jump to the next conclusion about, and I'll get to this here in just a second, the way that propped up slavery and so on and so forth. I think as we look at that over time, it is not fair to do, right? Because again, that takes the lens of where we are today and applies it to a group of people that weren't privy to the information that we have or the worldview that we have today. So anyway, that's one thing. The other thing that I would say then, as kind of a step from that, is that while obviously the institution of slavery was extremely harmful to our country in a lot of ways, and some people have even argued economically. People say, well, slavery was tied to the economics and whatnot. There are economists who have argued that slavery was a net zero on the economy, that it wasn't really as effective as it could have been. Otherwise, the economy, that is, not slavery, and so on. So at any rate, there's that aspect to it. But I also think too that when you look at what I mentioned earlier in the video, that having gone through slavery, as evil as it was, that when you compare where people are today in America versus and put it up against the lot of the human condition prior to the creation of the United States and what we have been able to advance and evolve into here as a country, as imperfect as we still are today, that the human race, regardless of ethnicity, religion, gender, all these other things that they try to fracture society into, is better off today than at any other point on record. And you can go back and look at even those who were considered wealthy and well off, in Europe, leading up to the age of exploration and in other civilizations. Today, the middle class average person is infinitely better off than those who were considered wealthy back then. And again, this is please don't, because what they'll do is they'll try to twist this, right? And they'll try, oh, you're just ignoring all of the injustices and on and on and on. No, that's not the case, right? That's not the case. But I am saying that those who are considered poor in the United States are better off than those who were wealthy, even 150, 200, 400 years ago, and you can keep going on and on. And so that is directly contributed to or attributed to the creation of the American experience. And again, we have a lot of issues. I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm just simply saying that this system of government and economics created have done more for the human race than anything else in human history, right? I would support that position and claim, and I would defend that. So that's one thing that you can kind of come back and say is that, yes, while we acknowledge the evils and ills in the history of this country, and we should explore those and we should talk about them and we should use them to forge a better version of this country, it certainly doesn't mean we should dismantle the whole thing and that it's been a complete evil, right? And there has been a lot, obviously, but we can still see that we are, again, much, much better off than before. The other thing that I would give you as maybe some fodder to push back on is the idea of the systemic aspect of racism, which is one of the core tenets of CRT. And in particular, what I kind of think about with this is, and I say this with other things as well, systems cannot be racist. Okay, that's a claim that I would make. Systems cannot be racist. All right, and let me explain. What is a system? Well, a system is something that is created or generated by who? People, right? So you take, for example, a government. Governments are instituted by people. Other systems, whether they be, education, corporations, any group in society, right, that creates a way of which you go about handling a certain issue or topic or whatever could be a system, and those are all created by people. Only people can display those tendencies, right? Just like when people say corporations are evil, corporations can't be evil. Walmart exists as a idea, expressed through people, right? That we're going to create physical buildings where we put items in for people to shop and buy. The actions that are taken on the behalf of the people under the name Walmart, right? So the board of directors, the CEO, the management, so on and so forth. I think that's a very key distinction that we need to start making when we talk about things like systemic racism. Because even if you were to give them their claim, because what I think the reaction to that would be is, okay, but those people created a system that promotes X, Y, and Z, right? So it promotes things like Jim Crow. It promotes things like redlining. It promotes things like whatever, fill in the blank that they'll use, okay? But I would say again, I would come back and I would say, okay, the same way in which you say a system creates a law or rule, whatever the level of entity that you're looking at, we'll just use government for this example, creates a law, right? That law means nothing until what? And I tell my government students this all the time, because we go through this exercise when we start talking about legal stuff. Laws mean nothing until they are enforced. Who enforces the laws that are created? People do, right? So here we go again. People can be racists, right? People can follow up on their natural desires or tendencies to want to put themselves ahead of other groups of people in society. And they do it through the law, right? But that's a key distinction, because, when you say, well, it's the system that's set up against them. Well, a system can be set up against people, and those people can still thrive if others choose not to enforce those laws. And again, I would get to the heart of the matter here, which is that if we're going to attempt to try to eradicate or change the hearts and minds of people who would want to act upon these tendencies by creating first laws that would disadvantage one group of people over another, which I claim any law is going to do that, right? Whatever the law is, it doesn't matter. We're just using race as this example. Any law is going to advantage one group of people at the behest of another group, whether you're talking about taxes or what have you. But then when people are going to act upon that, right? Because you can create something, you can have a group of people saying, hey, that's not the right way to do that. We need to do it this other way. We need to work to overturn that. And that's where you need to put your energy and effort into, right? Is trying to convince and change the hearts and minds of the people who want to act upon those racist tendencies or ideas, right? So the idea that a system or systemic racism exists is simply just to say that there are certain people who want to see that. And then there are people who willfully ignore or pursue other avenues to, again, advance the cause of those who are being disadvantaged. So in other words, what this does promote in my eyes is the bad apples example, right? That there are just whatever percentage of people out there who are going to use their position of power, whether that is being an elected official or the head of, an organization, to try to promote their agenda, which again, by the way, isn't just, particular to race. That's a human power issue, right? When people, get onto positions of power, whether it be like an HOA, head of an HOA, right? They want to see an agenda that, they want to see put into place that promotes their ideas and worldviews. So they're going to act in that way. That it is our duty and obligation to hold them accountable to what they can do and not do. And that if they are acting in bad faith, or if they are doing things that we don't agree with, that we, again, hold them accountable. And that's what parents are doing across the country with schools right now, right? They're going to school boards, they're going to teachers, they're going to their legislators, and they're saying, we are wanting to hold these people accountable because they are using a system to promote something that we don't agree with, right? And that's how you go about doing that. You try to change the hearts and minds of people. So I think that's an important thing to consider here as well, and think about the fact that two things you can take away with this as you maybe come into contact with people talking about CRT, or maybe if you get into situations where you see it in your child's education, that you try to convince and talk to people about the American idea, right, related to how we have grown as a country, where we are today, and then also historically, the narratives of which, racism exists and manifests itself today, that you can be bold to talk about those things and understand and know. And I can try to provide you with some resources as well that can help you to understand those a little bit better. If that's something that you're interested in, just reach out to me and let me know, and I can certainly shoot some things your way. And then also, too, to talk about the fact that those who are trying to advance the cause and position of CRT are just wrong. They're on the wrong side of history here, with the way in which, the American experiment has unfolded, the way in which it relates to opportunities for those today, people who are saying, oh, the system is stacked against us, or, has historically been against us, that you would have, again, some tools to be able to combat that a little bit. And be bold and, again, firm in your beliefs about what these institutions represent and what they should be accomplishing in our society today. So that is it for today. Hopefully, again, you'll find these videos helpful and useful. Again, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I will, as school starts up, try to continue to do these about once a week. If you find them helpful, let me know. I'll continue to produce them. If there are ideas or topics that you would like for me to address, feel free to shoot those along. You can reach me on Facebook. You can email me, justin.spears4@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter. Check out the podcast group on Facebook called They Never Taught Me That. You can find all of our episodes posted up there as well. So thank you guys so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.